There are many things in F1 that us as fans disagree on, but there are a few items where we do agree. And one of those in particular is on Mohammed bin Suleyam. MBS is commonly referred to, the current FIA president, and has been since 2021. And well, this man is just someone who is running the FIA like a dictatorship right now. He is just, there's something slimy about the guy, and well, of course, there's been a lot of news recently in relation to Mohammed bin Suleyam, and well, today, only 2 days after the announcement that Niels Wittich was leaving his role as race director of F1, the role that he has had for the previous 2 seasons. Another senior figure in the FIA has also left his position, and well, who is this man who has left his position in the FIA? Well, he is Paulo Bassari. Now, you may not know that name. I don't expect anyone really to know who this member of the FIA is, but it's his role in the FIA that is important here. Paulo Bassari was an FIA compliance officer. He is someone that people would bring complaints to, and he would then go and investigate those complaints if they were in breach, or if there is a potential breach into the FIA regulations. This can be technical, and it could also be ethical related. And well, coincidentally, and make of it what you will, he was the gentleman who compiled the report into Mohammed bin Suleyam, who had been reported to have got involved in trying to overturn the penalty that was given to Aston Martin at Saudi Arabia for Fernando Alonso in 2023. Aston Martin, who is sponsored by Aramco, Saudi Arabian oil company, the biggest in the country. Shock horror there, really, why that penalty might want to be overturned. So he has sacked bin Suleyam, the guy who investigated him, and supposedly, according to the BBC report, Bassari is said to have pushed back against or tried to navigate around a number of requests of bin Suleyam, who took exception to that approach. Now, we don't know what these requests were from MBS to Paulo Bassari. Were they unfeasible requests to Paulo Bassari that just weren't really ethical, and there was personal bias in those? Or was it Paulo Bassari not wanting to carry out these because he also had personal bias for the individuals that MBS or teams, whatever it may be, that he wanted investigated? But the FIA have declined to comment to BBC Sport, and when asked, Paulo Bassari told BBC Sport that he cannot comment on this either. So no doubt there's probably a clause in his contract in the FIA that's built in that he can't speak about his experiences within the FIA until maybe 2-5 year period after leaving his role, whether he be relieved of that position or whether if he leaves of his own accord. So that's probably common practice for an organisation like the FIA, who like to keep things very they like to keep it a closed shop, don't they? Let's just say they're not the most transparent of companies, to say the least. Any F1 fan, I think that's another thing that we can all agree on, that the FIA is not transparent. But what is interesting is that the FIA compliance officer's role is managed by the FIA Senate. The FIA Senate is a group of 16 members that is compiled of the president of the FIA, and it has its own president in there as well as deputy presidents, and they oversee basically the goings on of the FIA. They actually describe themselves as one of the most important bodies of the FIA, and it brings together both main competence areas of the FIA. They handle issues relating to management and general policy of the FIA that cannot be covered by either of the World Councils. As such, its main responsibilities are financial. It has a central and important role that, should the FIA find itself without a president, the Senate president would be placed in charge, supported by the deputy presidents, and then the Senate would organise an extraordinary General Assembly to elect a new president. And as this important body, the FIA Senate is, it is required to give its permission if the FIA compliance officer is to be fired. And according to the BBC Sport report, they have stated his position was not discussed at a meeting of the Senate this week, sources have said. And that is really bizarre. If you are going to get rid of someone who is in such an important role in the FIA, why was that not brought up at a Senate meeting, like a meeting of that magnitude? This is, in effect, a board meeting. That's like getting rid of a director and not bringing it up at a board meeting. Like, that's need to know information, especially when, by the sounds of it, I imagine a vote would have to be taken in regards to whether this individual's position is relieved or not. It sounds like the compliance officer's role is that important. And, well, it sounds like MBS has just not even complied with that. While, of course, he is part of the Senate, he is only one member of that Senate. Everyone has a vote, and maybe the president's vote is worth more, as is the Senate president. Sometimes that is the case. It's worth 2, shall we say, rather than 1. But even so, there are 16 members on that Senate who maybe have a relationship with this guy, who think he's actually doing a good job and he shouldn't be relieved from his position, and he has gone around this. Now, he could have had MBS discussions in person, personally, outside of this meeting, with maybe the Senate president or the vice presidents and the remaining members. But for it not to be included within the meeting this week, as sources have said via the BBC report, is very, very bizarre. And that's kind of that's taking things into your own hand. That's dictatorship, right? Wise that is like what like a dictator would do. Someone who just wants complete and utter control, because that is something that, by the sounds of it, should have been voted on. And some of you will say, look, this guy may have just been doing a bad job. That's why he's been got rid of. The position became untenable. And that is a possibility. However, there are processes in place, as I've just said. And it is not the only senior figure who has left the FIA in the last year or so. As we mentioned, the race director of 2 years just got fired. Yes, fired. Even though the FIA press release said Niels Wittich had stepped down, he said via BBC Sport that actually I was fired. So he came out refuting that press release by the FIA. Another decision made by MBS, and reports are that the relationship between MBS and the race director had soured. And, well, we know that MBS has previous of wanting to get very heavily involved in the running of F1. Now, there have been a number of departures over the previous year. We've had the sporting director, Steve Nielsen, quit in December in less than a year in his role. I mean, that's very telling. That is very telling that someone leaves after less than a year in their role. It's either that they're doing a very poor job, or it's the fact of that they've fallen out with management and the role isn't what it was cracked up to be. I've always said, and there's the famous quote, people don't leave bad jobs, they leave bad managers. And, well, Ben Suleyam is at the top of that tree, isn't he, in the FIA. We also saw Deborah Meyer. She left as the head of the FIA Commission for Women. Of course, there are some quotes resurfaced from Ben Suleyam making some less savoury comments about women in his past, which he has stated he's done nothing wrong over. There was investigations into it. I believe he stepped back from kind of public duties and as his role of the president for quite some time at the start of the year. And he eventually came back into the public eye. And then we have lost leading engineer Tim Goss. We've lost Natalie Robin as the role of chief executive officer after just 18 months in the role. In October, we lost the director of communications. We lost the secretary general of mobility. And that is just, I mean, how many more senior figures can leave an organization like in such a short amount of time? That is ridiculous. And it seems to be the common denominator in this factor is the guy who's leading it. Now, what is so intriguing as well is that I don't remember this much controversy or news about the FIA before Ben Suleyam was even in charge. This is, of course, not even touching on the Grand Prix Drivers Association, basically the drivers making a comment and an open letter asking that they're treated like adults, and making a direct comment to Mohammed bin Suleyam about how he goes about his comments, of course, for the swearing. And then there's been the whole drive for jewelry as well, with Lewis Hamilton particularly being targeted for that, because I don't think any other drivers really have jewelry on their body at most of the given time. And the FIA was never front and center before his appointment. They would just, the FIA, the most they got talked about was maybe stewarding decisions, but the actual running of the organisation, the personnel behind it, never got too much press, too much interest, because they were just in the background governing the sport, as they should be. And it should be the teams and the drivers and the team principals and individuals in the sport that are front and centre. Whereas since MBS has come into the sport, he has wanted to particularly make himself front and centre. You see him at so many races now where he is greeting drivers as they, at the top three, step onto the podium. There's been instances where he is just walking up and down the grid, front and center of cameras, when it comes to grid walks and so forth. And when you had Jean Todt as the FIA president, who was his predecessor, he'd get interviewed every now and then on the grid, but he was understated. He went about his business, and you'd never see him front and center like what we've seen with MBS, that's for sure. He particularly wants to make himself a public figure, it seems, and get really involved. But his leadership is clearly taken, it's gone as far as it has gone, in my opinion. And the fact of it, there's been so much personnel change, is just a key factor into what a leader of the FIA he is. A poor one. Such a poor one. But there is a silver lining, guys. MBS is up for re-election next year in 2025. However, if no one steps up to take him on, then he will retain that position for another 3 to 4 years until the next election cycle in 2029, I believe it is. And then 2025 also has the renewal of the Concord Agreement. That is the agreement of the Formula One teams, FIA and Formula One Management Group, that put together an agreement of how the sport should look moving forward until it's then renewed, which I don't know when that next period would be. So it's important to have a strong leadership figure at the head there to drive those negotiations for the betterment of the sport. And I think at the moment we can all agree that MBS is not driving the sport in the right direction from the FIA's perspective. That is for sure. But yeah, let me know what you think of MBS in the comments below. I'm intrigued to hear your thoughts. Maybe you don't even know who the guy is. This is your first time of being made aware of him. But I think, unfortunately, too many of us know who this individual is. And I'm not so sure the head of the FIA should be so prominent of a public figure as MBS has tried to make himself, in my opinion. I think you should only really raise your head above the parapet when things get particularly serious and you need to step in. Otherwise, you should just, I think it's a role, you should just quietly go about your business, and keep people happy. But MBS has wanted to do things differently, and I think the evidence suggests that it's not gone well. But yeah, intrigued to know your thoughts. Hit that like and subscribe button, turn those notifications on, and we'll see you for the next one.